Welcome to Eerie Tales for Restful Sleep, where soothing rain meets gentle horror for peaceful nights. Subscribe, like, comment, and share to join our brave night owl community. Sleep tight, if you dare.
The man with no eyes. Have you ever felt a sudden, unexplainable fear on a street you thought you knew by heart? Most people think of their own neighborhood as a safe zone, a place where the familiar bends and broken streetlights are just part of the scenery, not something to worry about. But sometimes, all it takes is one night, one strange encounter, to turn the most ordinary road into a place you'll never see the same way again. It started on a night that should have been like any other. I'd spent the evening at a work meeting that dragged on far too long, the kind where the clock seems to slow down just to spite you. By the time I finally got out, the world outside was already deep into the night. My watch glowed with the time, almost midnight. The parking lot was empty, the air was cool, and I felt that familiar exhaustion that comes from a day spent trying to keep up with everyone else's demands. The drive home was supposed to be the easy part. I live in a semi-rural area, the kind of place where the roads are narrow and the houses are spaced far apart. Most nights, the only company I have on the way home is the occasional deer darting across the road or the distant glow of a neighbor's porch light. I know every dip and pothole, every stretch where the streetlights have been out for years. It's the kind of route you could drive with your eyes closed. At least, that's what I used to think. That night the road felt emptier than usual. The sky was a deep, endless black, with only a few stars peeking through the clouds. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the familiar gravel and the overgrown grass along the shoulder. I was thinking about nothing in particular, just the relief of finally heading home, maybe what I'd make for a late-night snack, or whether I'd have the energy to watch a show before bed. Then out of nowhere, I saw him. At first, it didn't register as anything unusual, just a figure standing on the side of the road, right where the shoulder meets the ditch. He was facing the street, not moving, as if he was waiting for someone to pick him up. I slowed down a little, more out of habit than concern. People sometimes hitchhike out here, or they walk home from the bus stop if their car breaks down. But something about this man made every hair on my body stand on end. He was dressed in jeans and a jacket, nothing out of the ordinary. His hair was short, maybe dark, but it was hard to tell in the shifting light. What caught my attention, what made my stomach twist, was his face. Or rather, the part of his face I couldn't see. I tried to focus on his eyes, expecting to catch a glint of reflected light, the way you do when headlights hit someone's face at night. But there was nothing. No shine, no detail, not even the faintest outline of an eye. It was as if there were two dark patches where his eyes should have been, like someone had erased them from his face. The rest of his features were there. Nose, mouth, the shape of his jaw, but the eyes were just gone. For a split second, I thought maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe the angle was wrong, or maybe he was wearing sunglasses, even though that made no sense at midnight. But the longer I looked, the more certain I became that what I was seeing wasn't normal. My heart started pounding, my throat tightened, and my foot trembled on the gas pedal. He lifted his hand slowly, in a small, almost polite gesture. It wasn't frantic or desperate, not the way you'd expect from someone trying to flag down a ride. It was calm, deliberate, as if he knew I'd stop if he just waited long enough. But every instinct in my body screamed at me not to pull over. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was just a tired traveler, maybe he needed help. But the feeling in my chest told me otherwise. There was something deeply wrong about the way he stood there, unmoving with those empty patches where his eyes should have been. I pressed the accelerator, my hands slick with sweat on the steering wheel, and drove past him without slowing any further. As I passed, I glanced at him through the passenger window. He didn't move. He didn't wave more aggressively or try to get my attention. He just kept that arm raised, perfectly still, like a statue. My headlights swept over him, but still, I couldn't see his eyes. It was as if my brain refused to process that part of his face, as if it was protecting me from something I wasn't meant to see. Once I was about 10 yards ahead, I looked in the rearview mirror. He was still there, standing in the same spot, the only light behind him the dim orange glow of a distant street lamp. He didn't turn around, didn't lower his arm, didn't move at all. The image burned itself into my mind. A motionless figure, eyes lost to darkness, waiting for something I couldn't understand. My chest tightened even more. My breathing grew shallow, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I was too spooked to do anything but drive faster, desperate to put as much distance as possible between myself and whatever I'd just seen. When I finally reached my driveway, I parked under the single floodlight mounted on the side of my house. My hands were shaking so badly that I struggled to put the car in park. I sat there for a moment, engine off, listening to the ticking sound of the car cooling down. The world outside was silent except for the distant chirp of crickets. Usually that sound is peaceful, a reminder that I'm home. But that night, it felt like a warning. I thought about calling someone, a friend, maybe, or even the police. But what would I say? Hey, I saw a guy on the side of the road with no eyes. It sounded ridiculous, even to me. I shook my head, trying to convince myself I was just tired, that the darkness had played tricks on my eyes. I got out of the car, the night air cool against my face, and looked around. Everything seemed normal, no sign of the strange figure. I went inside, locked the door behind me, and headed straight for the bathroom. I splashed water on my face, stared at my reflection in the mirror. I looked exhausted, my shirt collar wrinkled, dark circles under my eyes. I tried to shake off the fear, telling myself it was just a weird encounter, nothing more. But I couldn't let it go. I turned off the lights in the house and peered out the living room window, hoping to catch a glimpse of the street. All I saw was my driveway, the same gravel, the silhouette of a few trees near the road. No one was standing there. I waited for a solid minute, eyes peeled, before I finally relaxed my shoulders. I mumbled to myself that I was just being paranoid. People hitchhike out here sometimes, and the darkness can play tricks on you. That explanation didn't feel satisfying, but I wanted to sleep without worrying about it. Sleep didn't come easy. Every time I started to drift off, I pictured his face, those empty, dark patches where his eyes should have been. My heart would jolt me awake. And I'd lie there, listening to the hum of my bedroom fan, every small noise outside magnified. A twig snapping, a gust of wind against the window, each sound made my heart jump. Eventually, I fell asleep from sheer exhaustion. The next morning, sunlight filled my bedroom, and for a moment I almost convinced myself it had all been a dream. I got up, showered, tried to focus on my usual routine. But my body felt sore, my shoulders and neck tense from the stress. I made coffee, checked my phone. No messages from work, so I had time to head out a bit later. But I couldn't shake the feeling from the night before. I decided I'd drive by the same spot in the daylight just to see what was there. The road leading to my place is narrow, with patches of old asphalt and a ditch filled with tall grass on one side, a few large trees on the other. I remembered the exact spot where I'd seen him, a bent guardrail, a broken streetlight. The morning was bright and calm, a slight breeze making the grass sway. I slowed down at the guardrail. Nothing was there. The ground looked undisturbed, no footprints, just dirt and some scattered trash, maybe a plastic bottle or two. I pulled over and got out of my car, which I don't normally do in that area. There aren't many cars passing by, so it felt safe enough during the day. I examined the ground, looking for any sign that someone had stood there. The only thing I noticed were tire marks, maybe from a passing tractor or my own car. Nothing else indicated that someone had been there for any length of time. I walked a short distance, checking for footprints or cigarette butts. Sometimes, if a person waits for a while, they leave something behind. But there was nothing obvious. The ditch was full of weeds and small rocks, no broken branches, no sign of recent activity. A mild breeze carried the scent of damp earth. I stood there, feeling uneasy, glancing toward the broken streetlight, trying to gauge where my headlights would have hit him the night before. Despite the bright daylight, I felt a hint of that previous dread creeping up my spine. I reminded myself that there was no one here now, and that gave me some relief. Still, I couldn't forget his face. I got back in my car, headed to the office, and tried to push the thought aside. Work was normal, emails, meetings, phone calls. But I realized I was just going through the motions. My mind kept drifting back to the road, to his raised hand, to that darkness where his eyes should have been. Around lunchtime, a coworker asked if I was feeling sick. I guess I looked pretty pale. I said I was fine, just tired. That evening, I left work earlier than usual. I didn't want to be on that road too late, especially not close to midnight again. I followed the same route home, my eyes peeled for anything unusual. I drove past the same guardrail and streetlight. Nothing, nobody. The rest of the drive was uneventful, but my chest felt tight until I pulled into my driveway. Once inside, I turned on every light in the living room and kitchen. Usually I keep them off to save energy, but I needed the brightness. I dropped my bag, rubbed the tension out of my neck, and thought about telling someone else in the neighborhood about what happened. Maybe a neighbor or the local convenience store clerk. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. I didn't have a solid explanation, and I was still unsure if I'd really seen what I thought I saw. People around here have their own stories, but I'd never heard anything like a man with hidden eyes. I didn't want to stir up rumors or make people think I was losing it. So I kept my mouth shut and tried to forget that night. But I had trouble sleeping again. The memory of him standing there kept flickering in my mind. I replayed it over and over, trying to figure out if there was a logical explanation. Maybe the shadow was from his hat or his hair or something else. But in my recollection, I hadn't seen a hat, and the shape of that darkness didn't look like normal shading. It was as if his eyes were erased. Thinking about it made my heart race, so I got up, walked to the kitchen, and got a glass of water. The cold water helped a bit. A few nights later, I had to stay late at work again. I told myself it was no big deal, that I was overreacting about one strange incident. But I felt that familiar knot in my stomach when I realized I'd be passing that same spot around the same time as before. Still, I had no choice. I finished up my tasks and started the drive home. The roads were quiet, my headlights illuminating the familiar route. The night sky was clear, and I saw stars above the silhouettes of the trees. When I approached the broken streetlight and the guardrail, I slowed down just a touch. My eyes scanned the shoulder, but I didn't see anyone standing there. I felt both relieved and unsettled. I kept my speed steady and tried not to stare too long at the exact spot where I'd seen him. It occurred to me that maybe I should keep going without lingering. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to maintain control. As soon as I passed that area, I exhaled a long breath, feeling a rush of adrenaline subside, leaving me slightly shaky. I turned on the radio, hoping some music would distract me. It helped a little, but my stomach remained knotted. I couldn't believe how much one short encounter was affecting me. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I felt physically and mentally drained. My hands trembled just like they had that first night. I went through my usual routine, locked the door, flipped on the lights, took off my shoes, then sat on my couch, staring at the dark TV screen. The house was silent except for the humming of the refrigerator and the faint buzz of the overhead lights. Part of me wanted to drive back out there with a camera, or at least my phone recording, to see if I could capture anything. But the larger part of me wanted to leave it alone and never think about it again. The next day, I tried to bring it up casually with a coworker, not describing all the details, just mentioning that I saw a strange hitchhiker. My coworker shrugged. He said he sometimes sees people wandering around at night, figured they might be drifters or locals who don't own cars. That didn't help me. The specific detail about the missing eyes was what had me on edge. I stayed silent about that part. Over the following weeks, I never saw him again, but I couldn't forget that image. On late drives, I would tense up whenever I passed the guardrail. Sometimes I'd speed up just to get it over with. Other times, I'd drive slowly, scanning the area. Each time, there was nothing out of the ordinary. The broken streetlight eventually got replaced, which should have made that stretch of road less creepy at night. Yet every time I approached, I felt a chill spreading up my arms. Now, whenever I remember that night, I still get a knot in my gut. I can recall the exact shape of his face, the way his hand moved slightly, the motionless way he stood when I looked back in my mirror. I can even recall the tightness in my chest and the sweat on my palms. Every detail remains clear in my mind. It's been months since that encounter, and I haven't told many people about it. I still don't know who or what he was. I don't have an explanation for those dark patches in place of his eyes. Some nights, I even wonder if I hallucinated out of exhaustion, but I know what I felt was real. That fear was real. I keep asking myself why I didn't see his eyes. There was nothing covering them from what I could tell. My headlights should have illuminated his face, and yet I remember total darkness in that specific area. Not just shadows, but a complete void. It's the one thing I can't shake. I'm a logical person, usually. I don't believe in bizarre stories without proof. But I saw something that night, and it scared me more than anything I've experienced in this quiet place. Even now, I can't drive past that guardrail at night without my body tensing. I still look at the spot for a second, half expecting to see him again. He's never there. There's no trace of him. But that memory is burned into my mind. I've tried to push it away, but I can't forget. It's changed how I feel about my own neighborhood. I used to feel safe here, even on dark roads. Now, I lock my doors more carefully. I keep my eyes on the shoulders of the street, and I make sure to come home earlier whenever possible. I don't know if I'll ever see him again. Sometimes I think maybe he was just passing through, or maybe I caught him at some weird moment. But the more I replay that night, the more unsettled I become. I wish I had a clear explanation. All I have is that vivid memory of a man without visible eyes, standing under a broken streetlight, gesturing for me to stop. I'm still relieved I didn't, and every time I pass that spot, I feel that same rush of cold dread, reminding me of what I saw and how it's never quite left me. The whisper in the earbuds. There's something about running at night that feels different from any other time of day. The world is quieter, the air is cooler, and the streets, usually so busy and full of life, become your own private track. For a lot of people, those late-night runs are a way to clear the mind, to let the stress of the day melt away with every step. That's how it was for me, at least, until one night changed everything. Now, every time I lace up my shoes and put in my earbuds, I can't help but remember the night I heard my own name whispered through the static. It started like any other evening. I'd had a long day at the office, the kind where the hours seem to drag and your shoulders get tighter with every passing minute. By the time I finally shut down my computer and left the building, the sky was already dark. The city lights glowed in the distance, but my neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where most people are in bed by 10. I liked it that way. I liked the solitude, the empty sidewalks, the way the world seemed to shrink down to just me, my music, and the steady rhythm of my feet on the pavement. I got home, changed into my running clothes, and scrolled through my phone to pick a playlist. I always made sure my earbuds were fully charged. Nothing ruins a run like your music cutting out halfway through. I locked my apartment door, stretched my arms over my head, and set out at an easy pace. The first mile was always about finding my rhythm, letting my breath sink with the beat, feeling the tension in my legs start to loosen. The night air was a little humid, but there was a gentle breeze that made it bearable. I passed by a few parked cars, their windows reflecting the streetlights, and jogged past the closed convenience store on the corner. The neon sign in the window glowed red, but the door was locked and the place was empty. I glanced around, just to make sure I wasn't missing any other night owls, but the street was deserted. It was just me and the music, the way I liked it. By the second mile, I was in the zone. My worries from work faded into the background, replaced by the steady thump of my shoes on the sidewalk and the pulse of the bass in my ears. I heard a dog bark in the distance, but I couldn't see it. Most of the houses had their lights dimmed, except for the occasional window with the flicker of a television. I tried to focus on my pace, keeping my breathing steady, letting the music drown out the quiet around me. I reached the halfway point near a small local park. There's a path that circles around a duck pond, but at night it's always empty. The streetlights there flicker on and off, casting strange shadows on the water. I usually pass through without stopping because it can feel a bit eerie when you're alone. That night, I felt a slight chill in the air as I entered the park. I paused my music for a second to catch my breath, listening to the silence. Then I turned the playlist back on, letting the beat fill my ears, and pressed forward. That's when things started to get strange. Somewhere around the next bend, my music started to crackle. At first, I thought it was just a bad connection. Maybe my phone was slipping out of my pocket or the Bluetooth was acting up. I tapped my phone to check for notifications, but nothing showed up. The static got louder, then faded, then came back again. I waited for the next song to kick in, but instead I heard something else. It was a whisper, faint at first, almost lost in the static, but then it grew clearer. It sounded like someone was saying my name over and over again, very slowly. The voice was shaky, almost breathless, as if it was right next to me. I froze in my tracks, my heart pounding in my chest. My first thought was that I'd accidentally switched to a radio station, or maybe I was picking up some weird interference from a passing car. But when I checked my phone, it still showed the music app running. No calls, no messages, nothing out of the ordinary. The whisper kept repeating my name, the same tone each time, like it was on a loop. My stomach tightened, and I felt sweat gather on the back of my neck. I tried to turn the volume down, but the whisper didn't get any quieter. It stayed at the same level, as if someone was standing right next to me, speaking directly into my ear. I could practically feel the breath on my skin. I yanked the earbuds out, expecting the sound to stop, but it didn't. The whisper continued, muffled but still there, as if it was coming from inside my own head. I shook my head, trying to clear it, but the voice kept going, repeating my name in that same slow, deliberate way. I looked around, hoping to see if anyone was messing with me, or if there was some device hidden nearby. The street was empty. The houses on that block were dark, no lights in the windows. I saw a flicker of movement behind one curtain, but it was probably just a shadow from a passing car. No one was outside, and there were no cars on the road. I tried to shake off the feeling of panic. I shoved the earbuds back in, hoping the music would come back and drown out the whisper. Instead, the voice came through even clearer. My name again and again, each syllable drawn out, as if the speaker was savoring the sound. My chest tightened and my breath started coming in short bursts. I forced myself to start jogging again, telling myself it was just a glitch, maybe some weird signal hijacking my earbuds. That can happen, right? Interference or some test channel picking up my phone's frequency. I tried to think of a logical explanation, but the whisper didn't stop. It kept going for at least a few more blocks, following me no matter how fast I ran. My pace got faster, not because I wanted to push myself, but because I wanted to get away from that sound. My heart pounded against my ribs and my throat felt dry. At one point, I turned off the music app entirely, even hit pause a few times, but the whisper kept going. It had this crackling quality, like a faint radio signal, but it was always the same volume, no matter how far I ran. I started to sweat more than usual, my shirt sticking to my back, my arms clammy. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, I saw nothing but dim sidewalks and parked cars. A few porch lights were on, but not many. The only motion I saw was a neighbor's flag flapping in the breeze. Yet I felt this strong urge to run faster, as if I was being followed, even though I never saw anything behind me. My mind raced with possible reasons. Could it be a prank from someone who got hold of my phone? Could it be a technical glitch that looped my own name back at me? None of it made sense. I hit the next street corner and skidded to a stop, my hand trembling as I held my phone. I shut down the music app completely, dragged down the notifications, and force-closed every open application. I considered turning the phone off right then, but I worried about losing my light source. Some stretches of sidewalk have broken lamps, and I need my phone flashlight to see. My head felt dizzy and I had a slight tremor in my hands. I pressed play on my music again, hoping it would drown out everything. For a second I heard the faint start of a song, then it vanished into the same static. The whisper returned, quieter but still there. I felt my breath catch in my throat. I bent over, resting my hands on my knees, trying not to panic. The whisper got louder again, as though it sensed my fear. I spun around, scanning the street. A breeze rustled some leaves by the curb, and I heard them scrape across the pavement. I listened for footsteps or any other noise, but all I picked up was that voice in my earbuds and the rustling leaves. My name, repeated, each syllable drawn out. I could feel goosebumps on my arms, and I couldn't control the slight shakiness in my legs. I muttered to myself, "Stop, this is just in my head, it's a glitch." But it didn't feel like a glitch. The voice sounded too organic, too directed at me. I pushed forward again, breaking into a quick run. My lungs burned, and I could hear my own breathing over the whisper now. My head pounded, my eyes darted left and right, scanning every driveway, every porch, every window. Nothing moved. I felt alone in the street, but that voice wouldn't let up. After what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes, the whisper cut off. 1 second it was there, the next second everything went silent. No static, no voice, no music. Just my own footsteps and heartbeat. I slowed to a jog, then to a walk, my breath ragged, the muscles in my legs trembling. I tried to steady myself against a nearby fence, slipped one earbud out, then the other. Silence. I tapped my phone. The music app was still paused, no error or glitch. My battery looked normal and there were no notifications. I stood there, letting the cool air calm my skin. My shirt clung to me, my chest rose and fell in fast gulps of air. I remember the faint hum of a distant air conditioner and the buzz of nearby streetlights. There was no sign of the whisper. I exhaled in relief, but I felt uneasy, like I was being watched. I turned in a slow circle, expecting someone to jump out, but nobody did. I decided to head straight home. I usually finish the 5 miles, but I wasn't in the mood to keep going. My mind was racing, and I wanted to get inside, lock my door, and check every device I owned. I kept the earbuds around my neck, not wanting to risk hearing that voice again. With every step, I felt my heart thud, and I had this nervous energy that made me want to sprint. I forced myself to keep a brisk walk so I wouldn't arrive home completely out of breath. When I finally got to my apartment, I slammed the door shut and double-locked it. I took off my sneakers and just stood there in the entryway, my clothes soaked with sweat. I felt a bit nauseous. I took my phone out of my pocket and hit the power button, turning it off entirely. I placed my earbuds on the kitchen counter. They looked harmless, tiny pieces of plastic and silicone. I stared at them, half expecting them to start hissing or whispering. They stayed silent. I made a beeline for the bathroom, splashed some cold water on my face, and tried to breathe slowly. My reflection showed wide eyes and a tense jaw, my hair damp and stuck to my forehead. I felt a knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. I dried my face and walked back to the kitchen. I turned my phone back on and waited. It lit up normally, no strange messages or errors. I scrolled through my notifications, nothing unusual. The music app showed the track I'd paused. I tapped it and the song played right away. No static. I tested the earbuds and they sounded normal. It was like nothing had happened. I checked for updates or viruses. Nothing. I even uninstalled the music app and reinstalled it to see if it was corrupted. Everything checked out. I sank into a chair and tried to piece it all together. My body felt exhausted, my pulse still racing, like my adrenaline had nowhere to go. I sat there replaying every moment in my head. The sudden shift from music to static, the whisper, my name repeated again and again, the way it followed me. It didn't make any logical sense. I tried to calm myself by thinking it was some random radio interference, but the sheer clarity of that voice made my skin crawl. It didn't sound like random chatter or bits of someone else's broadcast. It was my name, over and over, exactly the same tone each time, as if it knew me. The fact that it persisted after I turned the music off only made it worse. I shut my eyes and breathed in through my nose, out through my mouth. My apartment was quiet except for the hum of my fridge and a drip from the kitchen faucet. Everything seemed normal again, yet my mind wouldn't let me relax. I felt a chill run down my back whenever I remembered that voice. The whisper was so distinct. I'd never heard anything like that before. I started to wonder if I was just too tired. Maybe my brain was playing tricks on me. Stress can do strange things. Work had been tough that week and I hadn't been sleeping well, but it felt too real. I remember the tightness in my chest, the way my ears actually registered sound. If it had been a hallucination, I would expect some confusion or uncertainty about what I heard, but I was certain it said my name. Eventually, I got up and took a long shower. The hot water eased some tension in my shoulders, but I couldn't shake that uneasy feeling. I kept thinking about how it stopped so suddenly, like it vanished on command. After the shower, I checked my phone one more time. Everything worked fine. I decided to go to bed and see if I felt any differently in the morning. I didn't sleep well that night. I tossed and turned, worried that I might wake up to that sound again. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured myself back on that dark street, hearing my name whispered through static. I woke up with the sheets damp from sweat and my alarm blaring, my heart racing before I even got out of bed. Over the next few days, I tried to run again, but I couldn't forget that incident. I lowered the volume on my earbuds and started picking routes that had better lighting. The voice never returned. The music played normally, and I stayed aware of my surroundings. I kept glancing over my shoulder whenever I heard any slight noise or crackle. Nothing strange happened during those runs. Still, I found myself jumpy whenever I thought I heard a faint buzz from my phone. To this day, I have no explanation for that night. I checked my devices, updated everything, even replaced my earbuds with a different brand. I haven't heard that whisper since, but the memory stays with me. Sometimes, late at night, I think about how real it felt. I can still feel my heart pounding when I remember that static and the way my name echoed in my ears. I don't have a satisfying conclusion or a neat explanation. All I know is that I heard something that scared the hell out of me, and I don't know if it was some weird technical glitch or something else. I've told a few friends, and most of them shrug it off or tell me it must have been interference. I'd like to believe that, but I can't ignore how it followed me, how it said my name so precisely. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. I keep running at night because I don't want fear to keep me stuck indoors, but I stay alert now. I watch the streets, and I check my phone if the music so much as skips. Nothing has happened again, but I still get that chill when I remember how I froze in the middle of the street, hearing that faint voice whispering my name in the darkness. The house that wouldn't let go. There's a certain kind of unease that comes with moving into a new place. Even if you're not the superstitious type, there's always that first night when the walls seem to creak a little louder, the shadows stretch a little longer, and every unfamiliar sound makes you wonder if you're really alone. Most people brush it off as nerves, or maybe just the house settling. But sometimes, the feeling never goes away. Sometimes, the house itself seems to notice you, and it doesn't want to let you go. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to worry about things that go bump in the night. I've always been practical, the sort who checks the locks, makes sure the windows are shut, and then forgets about it. But all of that changed when I moved into a house that seemed to have a mind of its own. It started off innocently enough. I just landed a new job in a different part of town, and I needed a place close to the office. The rental market was tight, and I was lucky to find a small, affordable house just a few blocks from work. It wasn't fancy, but it had everything I needed. A couple of bedrooms, a decent kitchen, and a little yard out back. The landlord seemed eager to get someone in, and I didn't ask too many questions. I was just happy to have a roof over my head. The first night, I chalked up my nerves to exhaustion. I'd spent the whole day moving boxes, unpacking, and trying to make the place feel like home. By the time I finally sat down on the couch, the sun had set and the house was quiet. Too quiet, maybe. The walls seemed to press in around me, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing in the hallway. I told myself it was just the stress of moving, that I'd feel better in the morning. But the feeling didn't go away. Over the next few days, I started to notice small things that didn't add up. At first, it was easy to explain away. I'd leave a book on the desk in the guest room, only to find it on the floor the next morning. Maybe I'd knocked it over without realizing. I'd open a window to let in some fresh air, then come home from work to find it shut tight. Maybe I'd closed it and forgotten. I was tired, after all, and moving is always chaotic. But the incidents kept piling up. One night, about 2 weeks after I moved in, I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep. The house was silent, except for the occasional creak of the floorboards. I just started to drift off when I heard a small click from the hallway light switch. I sat up, heart pounding, and stared at the door. A thin line of light glowed under the frame. I was sure I'd turned off the hallway light before going to bed. I always did. I got up, opened the door, and found the hallway empty, the light burning brightly. I turned it off again, went back to bed, and lay awake for another hour, listening for any other sounds. The next morning, I was groggy and late for work. I blamed it on the stress, told myself I was just being jumpy. But that night, I heard something else, the sound of footsteps in the guest bedroom. Soft, slow, as if someone was shifting their weight from one foot to another. I tried to convince myself it was just the old heating system, or maybe the house settling, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was in that room. In the morning, I went in to check. Nothing looked out of place at first, but then I noticed a small box of papers I kept in the corner was lying on its side, the contents scattered. I hadn't touched that box in a week. I picked everything up, tidied the room, and tried to put it out of my mind. But the unease only grew. I decided to ask the landlord if there was any history to the house, or if other tenants had reported anything unusual. When I called him, he paused for a moment before giving a nervous laugh. He said some previous renters had mentioned lights turning on, items moving, and weird noises at night. He told me not to worry, joked that the house was just settling, but he didn't sound confident. I hung up feeling more uneasy than before. The fact that other people had complained about the same issues made my situation feel more real. For the rest of that week, I tried to ignore the strange sensations and minor incidents. I buried myself in work, came home late, ate dinner, and went straight to bed. But around Thursday, I had another unsettling experience. I was drifting off to sleep, lying on my side when I felt a presence on the other side of the bedroom door. It wasn't a normal feeling. It was like I could hear soft breathing, or maybe a light rustling, as if someone was leaning against the door. My mouth went dry, and my pulse pounded in my ears. I lay there for a few minutes, staring at the door, debating whether I should speak up. Maybe I should say, "Who's there?" But I didn't. I stayed silent, hoping the feeling would pass. Eventually, I made myself get out of bed, walked to the door, and grabbed the handle. My hand felt clammy. I turned the lock and swung the door open in one quick motion. The hallway was empty, lit only by the faint glow of a streetlight through the window. My chest was tight, my heartbeat thudding in my throat. I checked every room, but everything looked normal. I went back to bed and forced myself to sleep, but I couldn't relax until well past 2:00 in the morning. That weekend, I decided to spend more time in the house during the day, hoping that making it feel more like mine would help. I moved some furniture around, organized the guest room, put up shelves, and arranged my books. I stored some important files in the closet, set up a small desk in the guest room, and told myself I'd start using that space instead of avoiding it. Maybe that would break the tension. But over the next few days, I caught myself constantly checking on the guest room. I'd go in, look around, check the window, and look at the floor. Each time, it felt colder in there than in the rest of the house. I didn't have a thermometer, but it was noticeable. My arms would get goosebumps when I stepped through the door. I tried adjusting the vents, looking for drafts, but I never found a clear explanation. At night, I made sure the window was locked and the light was off. Sometimes, I'd wake up in the morning to find the window unlatched or the ceiling light on. It was like someone was messing with me. I called the landlord again, asking if he'd had the electrical wiring checked or if there was a problem with the heating ducts. He stammered a bit and said everything was fine. I pressed him for details about the previous tenants, but he avoided specifics. saying they just moved out because they found a better opportunity. I told him I was dealing with bizarre occurrences, but he got defensive and said I was free to move out if I didn't feel comfortable. Breaking my lease wouldn't be simple, and I didn't have the energy to look for a new place and move all over again. So I decided to stick it out, hoping I'd adjust. I started a routine of checking every room in the house before going to bed. I'd walk through the living room, the small kitchen, the guest room, and then the hallway. I'd flip off every light, make sure every door and window was locked, and then head to my bedroom. Even so, I kept waking up at random hours, hearing the sound of footsteps in the hall or soft clicks from the guest room door. Sometimes, I thought I heard the desk chair scraping against the floor, like someone was sliding it back. Once around 3:00 in the morning, I heard what sounded like the pages of a book being turned. A light flutter, unmistakable. I sat up in bed, heart thudding, and strained to listen. The noise stopped, and I was left sitting in silence. One morning, I decided to set up a small camera in the guest room. It was just a simple webcam connected to my old laptop. I wanted to see if anything would happen while I was asleep or out at work. I tucked it on a shelf, aimed at the desk and the window. The first night, I recorded about 8 hours of footage. When I played it back the next day, I saw nothing unusual except a bit of glare when headlights passed by outside. A couple of nights later, I tried again, this time positioning the camera toward the door as well. I watched the footage and fast forward. Around 2:14 a.m., I noticed the camera view shifted slightly, as if someone bumped into the shelf. It was a small jerk, but enough for me to see the angle was different after that point. I didn't see any figure, no visible person, just that sudden shift in the camera's position, and then it stayed that way for the rest of the recording. That freaked me out. I had locked the guest room door before going to bed that night. When I found the door in the morning, it was still locked. I used the same key I always used, and the knob turned normally. There was no sign of forced entry or tampering. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the shelf was unstable, maybe the camera just slipped. But I couldn't forget the other events. The lights, the window, the feeling of being watched. My stress level soared. I noticed my hands shook sometimes, especially at night when I did my routine checks. I started clenching my jaw in my sleep, waking up with a dull ache in my cheeks and temples. A couple of nights later, I woke up again around 2:00 in the morning. I lay there with my eyes open, staring at the dark ceiling, my ears tuned to every little sound. Eventually, I heard quiet breathing coming from just outside my bedroom door. I waited, hoping it would go away. My chest felt tight, my skin prickled. The breathing went on, steady and soft. I couldn't ignore it. I forced myself to get out of bed and walk toward the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the lock. I turned it quickly and pulled the door open. The hallway was empty. There was no sound, no movement. The air felt still, and my mouth was so dry I could barely swallow. I walked down the hall, passing by the closed door of the guest room. I touched the doorknob. It felt cold, but I turned it anyway. The door opened with a slight squeak. The room looked normal, but I sensed that same cold spot. The curtains were drawn. The light was off and everything was still. I flipped the switch and checked the desk, nothing out of order. I glanced at the webcam. It was in place, angled properly. I felt foolish standing there, shirtless, heart pounding, afraid of an empty room. But I couldn't deny the heavy feeling in my chest. After that night, the tension escalated. I had trouble focusing at work. My boss asked if everything was okay. I said I was just tired. Back at the house, I'd find more evidence that something was interfering with my routine. One evening, I noticed the corridor light was on again, even though I was sure I left it off. Another time, I discovered my closet door in the guest room was open wide, and a few of my boxes were halfway out. It looked like someone had been going through them. No valuables were missing, but the papers inside were rearranged. Finally, I decided I couldn't keep this to myself. I invited a coworker over for dinner, explaining I wanted a second set of eyes on the house. We sat in the living room and talked for a while. I didn't go into all the strange details, just said I felt weird in the place. My coworker walked around. commented that the layout was a bit cramped but otherwise fine. Nothing jumped out as odd during the visit. We watched a movie, and I felt more relaxed with someone else there. But after my coworker left, I felt the tension again almost immediately. It was like the air got heavier as soon as I was alone. That night, I stayed up until almost midnight. The house was quiet. I listened for footsteps, breathing, or movement, but heard nothing. Eventually, I crawled into bed, drifting off thinking maybe the place was giving me a night off. Then at around 3:00 in the morning, I startled awake. My bedroom was dark and I could barely see, but I heard a faint thump from the hallway. I tensed up and rolled onto my back, staring at the door. Another thump, closer this time. My stomach clenched. I considered calling the police, but I had no real evidence of an intruder. It was just an odd noise. I got up, opened the door slowly, and peered into the hallway. The corridor light was off, so I flipped it on. The hallway looked empty. Nothing on the floor, no signs of anything disturbed. I walked to the guest room door. It was slightly ajar, which was unusual because I always closed it fully. I pushed it open, and that cold air hit me again, making me shiver. The lamp on the desk was on, shining a dull glow across the small room. I had turned that lamp off earlier, right before going to bed. My breathing got shallow. I walked over and pulled the chain on the lamp, turning it off. I wanted to shout, to demand that whoever was doing this show themselves, but I knew that was pointless. There was nobody there. I stood in the dark for a few seconds, my eyes adjusting. I heard my own heartbeat in my ears. The place smelled stale, like dust and old paper. I turned around and walked out of the guest room, leaving the door open. I hurried back to my bedroom and locked the door. I lay awake until dawn, staring at the shadows on the ceiling. After that, I knew I couldn't keep living this way for long. The house was wearing me down. The incidents didn't stop. There was no big dramatic event, but the little things added up. Lights flicked on in empty rooms. Windows opened or closed on their own. Papers shifted. Drawers were found half open. Some nights I heard that soft breathing outside my door. Other times, I heard muffled movement in the guest room. I started sleeping with a small bat by my bed, but I never found anyone to use it on. I haven't moved out yet, but I've decided to keep looking for a new place. I'm going to break my lease, no matter the cost. I can't stand the constant edge of anxiety. I feel drained all the time. The landlord keeps dodging my questions about the house's past, and I don't feel safe here. It's not that I think something going to hurt me, but I can't handle the idea that I'm not alone, even though no one shows up when I look. Living with that kind of uncertainty tears you up inside. Every night I brace myself for some new sign that I'm being watched or followed. Every day I see little hints that something is off. Tomorrow I'm going to pack some bags and stay at a coworker's place for a while. I don't care if it's inconvenient. I need sleep. I need to stop feeling like my heart, about to jump out of my chest every time the floor creaks. I plan to talk to the landlord face to face in the morning, get him to release me from this lease, and then I'll move out as soon as possible. I can't prove what's happening here. I don't have any clear footage of a person or any real evidence that can explain these events, but I know it's real because I've experienced it. That's the entire story. I wish I had some neat ending or a rational explanation. I don't. This house just isn't right for me, and I'm done trying to make it work. I'm out of options. I'm leaving, and if someone else wants to take my place here, I'll warn them. This house doesn't feel empty. It feels occupied. And whatever is inside these walls doesn't seem interested in sharing. The silent stranger after the crash. There are moments in life when everything changes in a split second. One moment, you're in control, your mind wandering, your body moving on autopilot. The next, you're on the ground, dazed, hurt, and suddenly aware of how fragile everything really is. Most people think of accidents as random, chaotic events, just bad luck, a twist of fate. But sometimes, what happens after the crash is even stranger than the crash itself. Sometimes, help comes from a place you can't explain, and you're left wondering if you ever really understood what happened at all. I've always loved riding my motorcycle at night. There's a freedom to it that you can't get in a car. The wind in your face, the hum of the engine, the empty road stretching out ahead. It's just you and the world, nothing between you and the night. I'd been riding for years, and I knew the back roads around my town like the back of my hand. I never thought twice about taking the long way home, even if it meant getting in late. That night I was coming back from a friend's place on the edge of town. It was late, maybe close to midnight, and the streets were empty. The only light came from the occasional street lamp and the glow of my headlight cutting through the darkness. I wasn't in a hurry. I was just enjoying the ride, letting my mind drift as the miles rolled by. Then, out of nowhere, it happened. I felt my handlebar jerk to the side and my rear tire skidded on loose gravel. My stomach jumped and I squeezed the brakes, but nothing stopped the slide. My right knee hit the curb and everything else blurred. When I came to a halt, my bike lay on its side and I was on my back in the dirt. My helmet visor was smeared with dust. My ears buzzed with the leftover noise of the impact, and my chest felt tight. I checked my arms and legs, my knee pulsing with hot pain. I could move my toes, so I knew I wasn't paralyzed, but that didn't comfort me much. I propped myself up on my elbows to see what happened. My motorcycle was about 10 feet away, half on the road and half in the dirt near a vacant lot. My jacket was ripped at the shoulder, my palms scraped, and there was a sharp, throbbing ache in my knee. I tried to bend my leg, it bent, but it hurt so bad that I hissed through my teeth. My mouth was so dry I could hardly swallow. I forced myself to stand, leaning on my left leg. My right leg felt shaky and weak. I let out a small groan when I put a bit of weight on that side. My bike was still running, though the engine sputtered in a strange way. I reached for the handlebar and turned the key to kill the ignition. I heard the engine cut out, then everything went too quiet. The wind blew across that empty field next to me, carrying a musty smell. I looked around for help, but not a single car passed. It was late, but I still expected a pair of headlights somewhere. I took off my helmet to catch my breath, my face damp with sweat. I smelled my own panic, a salty odor mixed with the dust and a bit of gasoline. As I tried to collect my thoughts, I heard a crunch of footsteps behind me. A man stood there. He had an old, faded cap on his head. His jacket looked worn at the elbows and his hands rested at his sides. He didn't speak. I felt a spike of surprise and tried to straighten up, but my knee almost buckled. He reached out and gripped my arm. His fingers were strong and steady. I felt a wave of relief to have help, but he never said a word. He just gestured for me to lean on him. I nodded and tried to say thanks, but my voice came out a bit raspy. He started to guide me step by step toward the roadside. I limped alongside him, wincing whenever my right foot touched the ground. Once we got to the edge of the road, he turned back for my bike. He waved at me to wait. I did, leaning against a fence post that bordered the vacant lot. My mind raced with random thoughts. Did anyone else see us? Did my phone survive the crash? My pockets felt empty. I patted myself until I realized I'd left my phone in the bike storage compartment. I tried to see if the man would look back at me for instructions, but he seemed to know what he was doing. He rolled my bike onto the shoulder and balanced it there. When he came back, I noticed his eyes. They were serious, maybe a little sad, but I couldn't tell in the dim light. He motioned for me to follow him, his arm movement smooth and careful, like someone who knew how to handle an injured person. I asked, "Do you know if there's a gas station nearby?" The man gave a slight nod, then made a gesture like he wanted me to walk in a certain direction. I asked him, "Can you help me get there?" He nodded again. I wondered why he didn't speak, but I felt too worn out to press him. The pain in my knee flared up every time I took a step. My breathing got shallow, and I bit down on my bottom lip to stop from cursing too loud. The man stayed right next to me. I could hear his footsteps on the gravel, and I smelled a faint odor coming from him, like stale smoke or something metallic. He didn't look at me much. He just led the way. I scanned the horizon for some sign of headlights. Nothing. There was a slight glow further up the road, which I guessed might be the gas station. We walked like that for a few minutes, though it felt longer. I heard my pulse thudding in my ears. At some point, I noticed I was still wearing my own cap, but the back was twisted sideways from the fall. I took it off and shook it. Dirt flew out in small clumps. The man glanced over at me but didn't react. I wondered if he was deaf or just not interested in talking. My thoughts were jumbled. so I focused on the physical task of moving one foot after the other. The air was crisp. My teeth chattered a bit, partly from pain, partly from nerves. The silence between us felt strange, but I wasn't in the mood to force a conversation. After maybe another 10 or 15 minutes, I saw the bright lights of a gas station sign. It stood on the corner where the highway curved. The man waved his hand toward it. I nodded and said, "Thanks, man. I really appreciate it." He dipped his head in a small nod. I took a few more steps forward and planned to turn around and ask if he could help me call someone, but when I turned, I didn't see him. I spun a bit too fast and my knee screamed in protest. I gasped and stopped in my tracks. The man was gone. I tried to peer into the darkness behind me. There was only the vague outline of some weeds near the vacant lot, no other movement, no footsteps fading away. I listened for the sound of gravel shifting under shoes. I heard nothing but the wind. I stood there breathing hard and shaking. My mind raced with questions. Had he moved that fast? Did he slip behind some fence? I tried to call out, but my voice didn't carry very far. I just let out a long exhale and limped the rest of the way to the station. When I got there, the bright fluorescent light stung my eyes. The inside of the station looked empty, except for a bored attendant by the counter. I pushed the door open, and a bell overhead made a sharp ding. The attendant looked up, skinny guy, maybe mid-30s, wearing a rumpled gray polo shirt with the station's logo. I asked if he had a first aid kit. He came around the counter and grabbed one from a small wall cabinet. He asked if I was in an accident, and I said, "Yeah, back down the road." He nodded like he was half listening. I sank into a plastic chair by the window while he handed me some antiseptic wipes and gauze. After a few minutes, I told him about the man who helped me. I asked if that guy had come through the station earlier. The attendant stared at me. He said, "I haven't seen anyone out there but you." His tone was casual, and it sent a chill across my arms. I repeated my question, describing the man's old cap, his silent gestures, and the way he guided me here. The attendant shrugged. "I've been here all night. Nobody else passed by." I felt my breathing catch in my throat. It didn't make sense. The station had a clear view of the road, and that man had walked with me almost the entire way. I felt shaky again. I tried to change the subject, asked if the attendant had a phone I could use. My phone was in the bike, and I couldn't walk back without help. He handed me a cordless phone from behind the counter. I called a friend who lived close enough to pick me up. While I waited, I kept looking out the window, expecting to see that man, or at least my bike's headlights if someone was messing with it. The road stayed empty, just the glow of the street lamp shining on the corner. My friend arrived in about 20 minutes. We drove back to my bike, loaded it onto his pickup, and I checked the area. No sign of anyone. The vacant lot looked deserted. Once I got home, my friend helped me inside, and I propped my leg up with some pillows. He left after making sure I was okay. I had the next day off work, so I figured I'd clean up my gear and see how banged up everything was. In the morning, I woke up with a stiff knee. It was swollen but not broken. I rummaged through my clothes from the crash. My jacket was still dusty and my helmet had a few scrapes. Then I saw my cap. It was smudged with some dark stains on the rim and in a few spots on the front. At first, I thought it was dried blood, but the color wasn't quite right. It wasn't the usual dark red you get with blood stains. It had a slight shimmer, like an oily residue. I sniffed it, expecting a metallic or iron smell. Instead, I got a weird earthy odor, something I couldn't place. I tried to wipe it off, but the stain had stuck to the fabric. I decided to just wash the cap in the sink. I turned on the faucet, warm water running over the cap as I scrubbed with soap. The water turned murky. I saw bits of blackish material swirling in the sink. It almost looked like soot. I touched it and felt a gritty texture on my fingertips. It didn't feel like engine grease either. My bike's chain grease usually has a thick, slick feel. This was more powdery, crumbling when I rubbed my fingers together. I stared at it. I had no idea what caused those marks. I rinsed the cap until the water ran clear, but small traces of that grit still clung to the fabric. I dried my cap and left it on the counter all day. I kept thinking about the man with the old cap. I wondered if I had accidentally swapped caps with him, but mine looked the same as always, except for those weird stains. When I had put it on the night of the crash, I remembered the inside band feeling snug. That detail matched the cap in my kitchen. It had the same small tear at the back seam, so it was definitely mine. But that meant I had no explanation for the stains. I also couldn't figure out how my cap got that dirty in just that short crash. My jacket and pants had normal scuffs and a little grease from the bike, but not this odd residue. I replayed the accident in my head. I remembered the moment I flipped over the handlebars, my knee hitting the curb, the man showing up, the road so quiet. Everything played in my mind like a series of flashes. I asked myself if I had imagined him, but my bike was moved, and I couldn't have done that by myself. I could barely stand without his help. I wondered if maybe he was some local guy who didn't want to stick around or talk, but then the station attendant's reaction came back to me. He was certain nobody else passed by. I checked my knee. It was bandaged up, the bruise covered a wide area, and it hurt whenever I pressed it. That was real. The cuts on my palms felt raw, too, also real. I poured a glass of water and stared at my cap on the counter. The silence in my apartment made me feel anxious. I looked out the window, cars passed outside, some beeped. I turned on the TV for noise, but I couldn't focus on anything. My mind drifted back to that man's face, his eyes, the old cap, and the quiet way he helped me. I kept telling myself there must be a straightforward reason for what happened, but in the end, I couldn't find one. He disappeared so fast. I didn't hear a single footstep. The attendant should have spotted him, and there was no sign of him on the road when I went back with my friend. All I had was that weird dust, or whatever it was, on my cap. I ended up visiting the crash site a few days later. My knee was still sore, so I wore a brace. I parked my friend's pickup on the shoulder where my bike went down. I saw the skid marks, a patch of scuffed asphalt. The curb had a fresh scrape, probably from my knee or my bike's foot peg. I checked around for footprints or a spot where someone might have stood. I saw some flattened grass. It might have been from me landing there, or maybe from the man's shoes. The vacant lot looked the same as that night. Dry weeds, patches of dirt, some broken glass. No footprints stood out to me. I didn't see anything that could explain what I remembered. I walked around a bit, though it hurt to do so. The wind blew through the grass, making a rustling sound. The noise felt oddly tense to me. I imagined that man appearing again, but he didn't. I looked up and down the road. Some cars passed on the highway now, but nobody stopped. I'd had enough, so I got back in the truck and headed home. Since then, I've tried to move on from that night. Sometimes I forget about it for weeks, and then I'll glance at my cap or see the faint scar on my knee, and it all rushes back. I still don't know who that man was, or if I imagined him in the confusion, but I didn't imagine the bike being moved. I felt his grip on my arm. I saw him gesture for me to walk toward the gas station, and I found that strange black grit in my cap. I don't have any big lesson or deep thought about it. It happened, it freaked me out, and to this day, I can't explain it. I just know that when I needed help, someone showed up out of nowhere. He never said a word, and he vanished when I tried to thank him. The next morning, I found stains on my own cap that didn't match anything I recognized. That's it. That's all I can say. I still look at people's faces when I'm out on the road, especially if they're wearing an old cap. Part of me expects to see him again. Part of me hopes I never do. The dog with yellow eyes. There's a certain comfort in routine. For me, that comfort was found in late-night walks around the lake near my apartment. It was a habit I'd picked up during a stressful period at work, a way to clear my head and let the day's worries fade into the background. The path around the lake was just under 2 miles, lit by a scattering of old lamp posts and the occasional glow of the moon. Most nights I'd see the same handful of people, an elderly man who shuffled along with his hands in his pockets, a couple who always sat on the same bench, sometimes a jogger or two. It was peaceful, predictable, and safe, or at least it used to be. I never thought much about walking alone at night. The lake was in a quiet neighborhood and the path was well maintained. I liked the way the air felt cooler by the water, the way the surface of the lake reflected the sky, sometimes perfectly still, sometimes rippling with the breeze. I'd walk with my hands in my jacket pockets, earbuds in, letting music or a podcast fill my ears. It was my time to unwind, to let my mind wander. But all it takes is one strange encounter to change the way you see a place forever. It started on a random Tuesday. I remember because I'd had a long day at work, and I was looking forward to the walk more than usual. I parked my car in the small lot next to the lake, zipped up my windbreaker, and started down the path. The lamp posts cast enough light for me to see about 10 or 15 feet ahead, but not much more. The moon was out, but it wasn't full or especially bright. The air was cool, and I remember pulling my sleeves down over my hands as I walked. The first lap was uneventful. I passed the elderly man, who nodded at me without speaking. The couple was on their usual bench, talking quietly. I could hear the soft murmur of their conversation and the scraping sound of their shoes against the gravel. I was halfway around the loop when I noticed the dog. It was standing near the edge of the path, not far from a cluster of bushes. At first, I didn't pay much attention. Stray dogs weren't uncommon in the area, and most of them were harmless. But something about this one made me slow down. It was large, with dark, matted fur that seemed to absorb the light from the nearest lamp post. Its eyes caught the light and glowed a strange, yellowish color, brighter than the usual reflection you get from an animal's eyes at night. I glanced over, expecting the dog to move or look away, but it just stood there, perfectly still, watching me. I kept walking, trying not to make a big deal out of it. Maybe it belonged to someone nearby, or maybe it was just curious. But when I looked over my shoulder a minute later, the dog was on the path behind me, a few yards away. I slowed down for a second, and it slowed down too. I sped up, and it kept pace. It didn't charge or growl. It just stayed behind me at the same distance, silent and watchful. I couldn't hear any distinct breathing or panting. In fact, the dog was impressively quiet. The only clue to its presence was the silhouette moving in the corner of my vision whenever I glanced back. When I stopped to stretch near a bench, the dog stopped as well. I turned around and faced it. The lamp post light hit its eyes again, and they looked bright. Not in a normal, reflective way, but more intense, almost as if they were glowing from within. I spoke in a calm voice. "Hey, buddy, you lost or something?" The dog didn't react. No bark, no wag, no tilt of the head. It just stood there. I tried approaching it carefully, taking 2 steps forward with my hand out. The dog stepped back, lowering its head but never looking away. That gave me a little chill because I realized it was fixating on me, but not in the usual timid way dogs do. It felt more like it was studying me. I decided to ignore it for the time being and continued walking. It followed. Halfway around the loop, I encountered a maintenance worker pushing a small cart with cleaning supplies, probably checking trash cans. I pointed toward the dog. "Hey, do you know if that dog belongs to anyone around here?" The maintenance guy looked over my shoulder, squinted, and shook his head. "Haven't seen it before," he said, then returned to his duties. The dog stayed behind me for the rest of my second lap. After a while, I got a bit nervous. Something about those eyes bothered me, and I didn't like the way it matched my pace. It never once tried to come closer, but it also never turned away. I heard crickets, faint traffic noise from the nearby street, and my own footsteps on the gravel. The dog's footsteps were barely audible, like it was treading lightly. When I finished the second lap, I thought about checking if it had a collar. I slowed down until I almost stopped. It stopped too, still maintaining that distance. I took a few deep breaths, trying to steady my nerves. My heart was beating faster than normal, and I could feel the blood pulsing in my neck. I spoke louder this time. "Come here, buddy. I won't hurt you. Come on." I crouched down and patted my leg like people do when calling a dog. It inched back a bit. I took 1 step forward, and it bolted off the path and into the darker area near a patch of trees. I lost sight of it for a moment. I scanned the area, squinting. The bushes near the water shook slightly, but I couldn't see any movement beyond that. The dog seemed to vanish. I walked toward the bushes, calling out, "Hey, come on. I just want to check if you're all right." No sound came back. I walked around the nearest trees, not straying too far from the path because it was easy to lose footing in the shadows. I expected to see it lurking or running away, but there was nothing. No rustling, no sign of paw prints, nothing at all. I felt a wave of unease tighten my stomach. My hands felt clammy, and the hairs on my arms stood up. I told myself the dog must have slipped through a gap in the fence or found some hiding spot. I tried not to let my imagination run wild. It was just a stray dog after all, but the sudden disappearance unnerved me. I continued my walk for a third lap, mostly to convince myself I wasn't spooked. Each step felt heavier than usual. I kept glancing around, searching for movement. A small breeze rustled the leaves, and once in a while, a passing car's headlights sliced across the water. Every time I passed under a lamp post, I caught a glimpse of my own shadow stretching ahead of me. I felt the strong urge to check behind me. Sometimes I gave in and looked, nothing. My chest felt tight every time I turned around. That night, I went home earlier than usual. In my apartment, I turned on more lights than normal. I noticed my heart was still beating fast and my breathing was shallow. I tried to watch some late-night TV, hopping to distract myself, but every few minutes my mind drifted back to that moment when the dog locked eyes with me. I told myself it was silly, that I had to let it go. Eventually, I went to bed, but I slept poorly. I dreamed about walking around that lake, hearing footsteps behind me and never being able to catch the source. The next evening, I almost skipped my walk. My stomach felt tense at the idea of going back there, but I forced myself. My routine mattered to me, and I hated letting fear dictate my actions. I arrived around the same time, parked in my usual spot, and set off along the path. At first, I felt uneasy, scanning the area more than usual. I noticed every small detail: the dim light from each lamp post, the rust on the metal benches, the scattered pebbles on the ground. For the first half of my walk, I didn't see any sign of that dog. I started to relax a bit. Then near the lake's far side, I thought I saw movement in the corner of my eye. I turned quickly, but there was nothing on the path behind me. I exhaled, feeling a bit foolish. I chalked it up to my imagination. But as I continued, I caught a glimpse of a dark shape near the edge of the lake. It looked like the silhouette of a dog, watching from a distance. I froze mid-step, my breath caught in my throat. The shape vanished behind some tall reeds. I hurried over, shining my phone's flashlight. The area was empty. The water lapped gently against the shore, and the breeze made the reeds sway, but there was no sign of the dog. My heart was thudding in my chest again, my palms sweaty, and I found myself swallowing hard. I turned around and kept moving, walking faster. A few minutes later, I saw a man jogging ahead of me. He had headphones on. I wanted to call out to him, but I felt embarrassed. What would I even say? Hey, have you seen a weird dog with glowing eyes? That sounded ridiculous in my head. I decided to keep quiet and finish my lap as quickly as possible. I went home that night feeling uneasy again. This time, I stayed up for hours, packing around my small living room. I kept looking out the window, half expecting to see a pair of yellow eyes staring at me from the parking lot. I knew it was an irrational thought, but I couldn't shake it. Over the next week, I tried returning to the lake several times. Some nights I saw no sign of the dog. Other nights I thought I spotted a black shape slipping behind a tree or vanishing into a cluster of bushes. I never got a clear look, and I never heard a bark, whine, or growl, just a flash of dark fur and then nothing. Each time it happened, I felt my muscles tight, my shoulders got stiff, and my breathing became shallow. My mind would race, thinking, where is it now? Is it following me again? I stopped talking to people around the lake. I used to greet fellow walkers and wave at passers-by. Now, I kept my head down, scanning the periphery, trying to catch the dog if it showed up. Sometimes I felt a faint sense of shame, like I was letting my nerves get the best of me. But each time I spotted that flicker of movement, that tension came roaring back. My heart would pound, and a surge of adrenaline would make me want to leave immediately. One night I decided to do something different. I brought a small bag of dog treats. I figured if it really was a stray, maybe I could coax it close enough to check for a collar. I walked slowly, calling out in a gentle voice, "Hey, I brought something for you." I just want to help." My voice echoed a bit in the still air. I held out a treat, but nothing approached. I left a few pieces on a bench, hoping that might attract it. After a few minutes, I heard a rustling in some bushes behind me. I turned around, shining my flashlight. The leaves shook and I saw the outline of the dog's head. Its eyes caught the light. I tried to stay still, but my pulse was already racing. The dog blinked, then moved backward, disappearing into the darkness. I checked the bench a few times, but nothing touched the treats while I was there. From that point on, I never knew if I would see the dog or not. Some nights, I managed to go through my entire walk in relative peace. Other nights, I caught those eyes reflecting off my flashlight or the dim lamp posts. It became a pattern: appear, watch, vanish. Every time it happened, my stomach churned and my hands trembled a bit. Sometimes I felt silly for being so jumpy, but there was something about those eyes that unsettled me. They always looked steady, not wild or fearful. Last Thursday, I had one of the strangest moments yet. I was on my second lap, halfway around, when I felt a presence close behind me. The hair on the back of my neck prickled and I stopped in my tracks. I turned around, phone, flashlight ready, but I saw no one. As soon as I turned forward again, I caught a glimpse of the dog standing on the path in front of me, maybe 15 feet away. That was the first time it stood ahead instead of behind. My heart hammered in my chest. I felt sweat on my forehead. I lifted the flashlight, illuminating its face. The dog didn't flinch. Its fur looked matted in places, and its eyes glowed in that odd yellowish way. I took a step toward it, hand extended, murmuring, "It's okay." The dog backed away slowly, then turned and darted off the path, disappearing behind a tall cluster of reeds. I hurried after it, shining my light, but by the time I reached that spot, I saw only ripples in the water near the lake's edge. I spent the next hour circling the lake, searching for it, but found nothing. No sounds, no shapes, no footprints in the mud. I went home frustrated and shaky. I had trouble sleeping. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw that image of the dog's yellow eyes staring back at me. Ever since then, I've changed how I walk. I keep looking behind me every couple of minutes, scanning for any shape or movement. I try to tell myself there's a logical explanation. Maybe the dog belongs to someone nearby. Maybe it's shy or has a habit of hiding. But deep down, I can't shake that feeling that it's waiting to show up when I least expect it. There's a lingering sense of unease I can't get rid of. Even now, as I'm talking about it, I feel my shoulders tense and a slight tremor in my hands. Sometimes I consider switching to a different jogging path or trying the gym instead, but I can't let this fear control me. I still go to that lake at night because it's part of my routine, and I don't like feeling pushed out of my own space. Yet every time I walk past a dark section of the path or hear a soft rustle in the bushes, my body tenses up, my eyes dart around, and my breath quickens. I remember that first time I locked eyes with that dog, and my heart thumps a little harder. I haven't seen it for a couple of days now, which makes me uneasy in a different way. I wonder if it's still there, watching from a distance. I catch myself glancing back all the time. I can't tell if I'm imagining shapes in the shadows or if it really is there. I just know that if it wants to appear, it will, and if it decides to vanish again, I won't be able to stop it. I guess I've come to accept that for now, but I'll never walk that loop without being on high alert again. All it took was one strange dog with those unnerving yellow eyes, and now everything feels different. I'm not sure when, or if, I'll ever feel completely relaxed by that lake at night. The office that wakes up at night. There's something about office buildings after dark that just feels wrong. Maybe it's the way the fluorescent lights flicker, or the echo of your own footsteps in empty hallways, or the way the silence seems to press in from every side. Most people never experience it. They clock out at 5, head home, and never think twice about what happens in those empty spaces when the sun goes down. But if you've ever stayed late, you know, the building changes. The air gets heavier, the shadows stretch, and the familiar becomes strange. I learned that the hard way in an office that seemed to wake up at night. I took the job because I needed a change. The pay was good, the commute was short, and the building, An old office tower in a half-abandoned business district seemed like a step up from my last gig. Most of the surrounding buildings were empty, and the ones still in use had only a handful of employees. My new office was on the 8th floor, a space that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1980s. The carpeting in the hall was worn and stained. The walls had scuff marks that no one ever bothered to paint over, and the fluorescent lights hummed when I walked by. In the mornings, maybe a few people showed up, but they kept to themselves. The place was a maze of identical hallways and empty cubicles. I didn't mind at first. I liked the peace and quiet. My office was down the corridor from the elevator with a big window facing a row of old warehouses. The view wasn't special, but it was something. I set up my computer, arranged a few personal items on the desk, and settled in. The job was mostly administrative tasks and report writing. I could work at my own pace, and with so few people around, I figured I'd have no distractions. There was a break room on the opposite side of the floor, but it was always empty. I saw it only in passing when I went to get coffee. The overhead light in there flickered like it was on its last leg. No one ever replaced it, so it just flickered whenever it felt like it. I had a normal routine for the first few weeks. Come in around 9, finish up by 5 or 6, and leave. I didn't know any of my colleagues well. I recognized a few faces in the lobby or elevator in the morning, but no one spoke. The whole place felt sleepy, like it was waiting for something. Sometimes I'd hear a door close far down the hall, but I wouldn't see anyone. I figured they kept different hours. Then one evening I had to stay late. It was a Friday, and I had a deadline for a big report. I felt confident I could wrap it up in a couple of hours. By 7, the entire floor felt deserted. The hallway lights near the elevator turned off automatically, but the ones near my office were still on. The air felt stale, and the hum of the fluorescents grew louder because there were no other sounds. I tried not to pay attention. I put on my headphones, listened to some background music, and typed away. Around 8, I realized I was hungry. I hadn't seen a cafeteria or any restaurants within walking distance. Most places closed early. I decided to power through the hunger and get the report finished. While I worked, I noticed out of the corner of my eye that the light in the corridor across from me was flickering. It wasn't unusual. Lights in this place always seemed to flicker, but this time it was flickering in a steady rhythm, like someone was flipping the switch on and off. I tried to ignore it, but it went on for a while. It started getting on my nerves, so I got up to check. I figured maybe it was a wiring issue or something that needed a quick fix. When I stepped into the hall, the light stopped flickering. It was steady, like I'd imagined the whole thing. I walked a bit down the hall, looked around, and didn't see anyone. The entire floor looked empty. The break room door was shut, the elevator area was dark, and all the other offices were locked. I shrugged and went back to my desk. I put my headphones on again and opened the report file. I was about to type when the sound in my headphones cranked up to maximum volume without warning. The sudden blast of noise shot adrenaline through my body. I jumped, yanked off the headphones, and fumbled for the computer volume controls. I stared at the screen, but the volume icon showed it was at a normal level. I lowered it all the way, thinking maybe I'd accidentally pressed something. Then I tried again. The moment I put the headphones back on, the volume went to maximum again. The music blasted my ears. My hands shook a little as I turned off the entire computer. I expected the sound to stop. It didn't. The headphones were still screaming music at top volume, even though my computer screen was black. It felt like my heart was pounding in my throat. I unplugged the headphone cable, but the music kept going for a second, then abruptly cut off, as if someone had flipped a switch. I stood there holding the headphone cable in my hand, breathing hard. I could hear my pulse, my scalp tingling. I tried to calm down, but something about that moment felt wrong. My computer was off, so how did the headphones keep playing music? I told myself it was a glitch, maybe some weird electrical feedback or a short circuit in the headphone jack. I sat back down, waited for my heartbeat to slow, and turned the computer on again. Everything loaded normally. I tested the volume. It seemed fine, but my nerves were shot. I couldn't concentrate on the report. My eyes kept wandering to the time in the corner of the screen. It was almost 9. The building was dark outside my office. I had this urge to leave, but I still had work to do. I ended up forcing myself to finish one more section of the report. My leg bounced up and down under the desk. Every tiny noise made me jump. The air conditioner switched on and I felt my chest tighten. My eyes darted to the hallway, expecting to see the lights flickering. They stayed steady. I tried to shake off the panic. I finished typing, saved my work, and packed up to go home. As I headed for the elevator, the corridor light began flickering again. This time I didn't look back. I pressed the elevator button, but it took forever to arrive. I stood there in the dark, gripping my bag, glancing over my shoulder. My skin felt cold and my mouth went dry. Finally, the elevator arrived. I stepped in, pressed the button for the lobby, and watched the door close. I felt a jolt in my stomach as the elevator descended, and the moment I hit the ground floor, I rushed out to the parking lot. There were only a few cars left. It was quiet. I got into my car and left. That night, I didn't sleep well. My mind kept replaying the incident with the headphones. I tried to explain it away. Maybe my computer's software malfunctioned. Maybe there was some automatic volume booster that I had turned on by accident. But it bothered me enough that I dreaded going back to work on Monday. The weekend passed slowly. I told a friend about it, but I left out some details. I didn't want to sound paranoid. He thought it was just a hardware glitch or some electrical surge in an old building. I decided that must be the case. When Monday came, I went in at my usual time. The building felt the same in the morning as it always did, quiet, a little sad, mostly empty. I felt silly for being so nervous. I went through the day without any issues. I didn't stay late. The same thing happened the following days. Everything was fine if I left before 7. I still noticed the flickering lights sometimes, but I didn't pay much attention to it. I did my job and went home. A week later, I got stuck with another late assignment. I told myself I'd work faster so I could leave by 6, but the tasks piled up and I lost track of time. By the time I checked the clock, it was 7:30. I felt a lump in my throat. I tried to ignore it. The floor was empty again. The cleaning staff never came up that high, at least not that I'd ever seen. The hallway was silent. I got the same uneasy feeling in my stomach. My hands felt sweaty on the keyboard. I remembered the headphone incident and decided not to use them this time. I played some low music through the computer speakers while I worked. I hoped it would keep me relaxed. Around 8:15, I heard a door slam somewhere on the floor. It echoed down the hallway. I jerked upright in my chair. I listened for footsteps, but I heard nothing. The building's temperature felt colder than usual, like the air conditioner was cranked up too high. I stood up and peeked out of my office. The corridor light was on, but the far end was dark. I didn't see anyone. My mouth felt dry. I decided to check if maybe a coworker was still around. I walked down the hallway, my shoes making a dull thud on the old carpet. The break room door was open, but the room was dark inside. I flipped the light switch, nothing happened. The bulb must have burned out completely. I turned away, but as I stepped back into the corridor, I heard a faint rustling sound behind me. It sounded like a plastic bag moving across the floor. I froze, then slowly turned around. The break room was empty. I couldn't see any trash on the floor. My heart sped up. I could feel my pulse in my neck. I backed away and headed toward my office. I decided enough was enough. I saved my work, packed up, and started walking toward the elevator. As I reached for the elevator button, I heard the same rhythmic flickering of the lights behind me. The pulses were slower this time, almost deliberate. My scalp tingled. The elevator doors didn't open quickly enough. I tapped my foot, breathing fast. When the doors finally slid open, I rushed inside and hit the button for the lobby. The door shut, and I watched the floor number indicators count down. When I reached the lobby, I almost ran across the empty reception area to the parking lot. My eyes stung from staring at my screen all day, and my head pounded. I just wanted to get home. Over the next few days, I tried to avoid staying late, but my workload didn't let up. I kept noticing that as the clock approached 7:30 or 8:00, the building's atmosphere changed. The air felt heavier, the lights flickered more often. The entire place got colder, like the ventilation system was set to a lower temperature at night. I never saw anyone else working late. I never saw the cleaning crew. I started having dreams about the flickering lights. In those dreams, I'd be in the hallway and the lights would flicker faster and faster, then explode in a flash. I'd wake up covered in sweat, my heart pounding, confused about where I was. 2 weeks ago, I had my worst late night. I was behind on a project, so I stayed until nearly 10. I felt on edge the whole time. Every time I heard a small sound, like the building settling or the elevator mechanism, I'd tense up. My shoulders ached from stress. I got up around 9:30 to stretch. I walked slowly down the corridor, telling myself to calm down. When I passed the break room, the door was wide open. The overhead light in there flickered like it always did, but this time I swore I saw a shape by the counter. It was just a quick glimpse, but I jumped. My heart thumped so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I snapped my head back for a better look, but the room was empty. The door creaked as it swung slightly. I didn't move any closer. My skin crawled, my breathing grew fast. I hurried back to my office and tried to collect my things as quickly as I could. I logged off my computer, grabbed my coat, and headed for the elevator. The corridor felt longer than usual. My feet felt heavy. I kept looking behind me, expecting to see something or someone following me. When I got to the elevator, the panel read that it was on the first floor. I pressed the button and it started coming up. It took a while. I tapped my fingers against my leg, my throat dry. The flickering started again. At first, it was the light near the break room, then the one near the far corner office. Each section of the corridor turned off and on, one after the other, as if someone was walking along flipping switches. I heard a buzzing sound from the overhead fixtures. My skin broke out in goosebumps. The elevator finally arrived. As soon as the doors opened, I scrambled inside and pressed the lobby button. The doors closed and I felt the cabin jolt downward. I stared at the ceiling. My reflection on the metal door looked nervous, pale. I tried to breathe normally, but my heart didn't slow down until I was already in my car, leaving the parking lot. Since then, I haven't stayed later than 6. I rearranged my schedule to come in early so I could leave on time. I've had a few close calls with deadlines, but I can't bring myself to stay past sunset. Sometimes, around 5:30, I start getting jittery. I keep glancing at the time, recalling that moment when my headphones blasted music, or that second when the hallway lights flickered in a steady rhythm. No one else mentions anything weird about this building, but I rarely see my coworkers for more than a few minutes anyway. If I have to send an important file, I do it from home or from a coffee shop. I'm not comfortable in that place after dark. It feels like the building shifts at night, like the floors stretch into something empty and cold. I still don't have an explanation for what happened with my headphones that first night. I tried to talk about it with a local IT guy, but he just shrugged and said it sounded like a freak hardware error. All I know is that it felt too sudden, too intentional. The flickering lights are easier to write off as old wiring, but the pattern in their flicker felt strange. It wasn't random, it was timed, as if someone or something controlled it. Right now, I stick to my early schedule. I keep my phone charged in case I ever get stuck late again. I don't listen to music through headphones in the office. If I ever have to stay after dark, I don't plan on investigating any strange lights. If I hear doors slamming or see the break room door open by itself, I'm leaving immediately. I don't care about missing a deadline or risking my job. There's a line between being dedicated and ignoring every alarm bell in my head. I don't know if it's just my imagination. Maybe this old building has a bunch of electrical problems and I got spooked once, so now I notice every flicker and every sound. But my gut tells me otherwise. Every time the clock hits around 8, the atmosphere changes. The lights flicker a certain way. The corridors seem darker even with the fluorescents on. And I remember how it felt when the music blasted through my headphones long after the computer was shut down. That's why I'm careful now. That's why I rush out before night falls. And that's why, even though I try to act normal, I can't shake the chills I get every time I look at that clock and see it getting close to the hour when everything started. I'm still working there because I need the paycheck, but I don't feel safe. Even during the day, the building feels hollow, like it's waiting. I try not to linger in the halls or the elevator. I keep my head down and do my job. Every night I leave on time, glance over my shoulder and head straight for my car. I don't think this building is haunted in the typical sense. I've never seen a ghost, I've never heard a voice. But whatever is behind the flickering lights and the sudden noise in my headphones is enough to keep me on edge. I can't forget that night, and I don't want to repeat it, so I keep my distance. I try to push it out of my mind, but every time I pass the 8th floor corridor, I remember that moment when I realize the building wakes up at night, and that memory is enough to send a shiver through me, even now. The pendant from the past. Some objects carry more than just memories. Sometimes, what you inherit isn't just a piece of jewelry or a box of old letters. It's a feeling, a presence, a weight that settles over your life and refuses to let go. Most people think of family heirlooms as comforting, a way to stay connected to the past. But what if the past doesn't want to let you go? What if something comes with it, something you can't see, but you can feel every time you close your eyes? My story starts with a box. Not a fancy one, just a small, battered wooden box with a brass hinge, tucked away on the top shelf of my grandfather's closet. He passed away a few months earlier, and I was the one left to sort through his things. Most of it was what you'd expect: old clothes, faded photographs, a few watches that hadn't worked in years. But the box was different. It was heavier than it looked, and when I opened it, I felt a strange tension in my hands, like a faint vibration running through my fingers. Inside, resting on a piece of faded velvet, was a chain with a pendant. It didn't look like much at first, just a dull, silver-colored oval, smooth on both sides with no markings or engravings. But the moment I picked it up, I felt a jolt. Not a painful shock, more like the static you get from touching a doorknob in winter, but deeper, almost inside my bones. My hands shook for a moment and I almost dropped it. I brushed it off, telling myself I was just tired from cleaning all day. But then I noticed the smell. It was metallic, but not in the usual way. It was stronger, almost sour, like steel that had been sitting in water for too long. I slipped the chain into my pocket without thinking much of it, finished packing up the rest of the items, and drove home. By the time I got inside, I noticed my pocket felt warm. Not hot enough to alarm me, just warm in a way that didn't make sense. I chalked it up to my own body heat, or maybe just my imagination. I set the box of my grandfather's things on the kitchen table and started laying everything out. The watch was broken, the letters were yellow, the postcards were from vacations he'd taken decades ago. Then I pulled out the chain again. The moment I held it in my hand, the tremble in my fingers returned. It didn't hurt, but it caught my attention. I tried to look at the pendant more closely, but there was nothing to see. No initials, no design, just a blank, smooth surface. I'm not the kind of person who gets easily scared. I was curious, that's all. So I left it on the kitchen counter while I heated up some leftovers in the microwave. But the longer I stayed in that room, the more I felt something was off. My ears started ringing like a faint buzzing. I'd had tinnitus before, but this was different. It came and went in waves, and every time I looked at the chain, the buzzing seemed to spike. I tried to ignore it, but it was hard to focus on anything else. That night I had trouble sleeping. I got into bed around 11, but I tossed and turned for at least 2 hours. When I finally fell asleep, I had a nightmare. It was the first of many. In the dream, I was in my old room at my grandfather's place, searching through an empty closet. I felt an urge to find something, but I didn't know what it was. The walls started shaking and the door slammed shut, locking me inside. I heard a scraping sound like metal dragging across wood. I woke up drenched in sweat. When I turned on the bedside lamp, I noticed scratch marks on my left forearm. They were thin, not deep enough to bleed much, just shallow red lines. I rubbed my arm, confused. My fingernails were short, so it didn't make sense. I sat there, breathing hard, trying to come up with a logical explanation. Maybe I'd scratched myself on a piece of furniture, but there was nothing sharp in my bed. The next morning, my arm stung a bit, and I found myself looking around my room more carefully than usual. I couldn't shake the sensation that I wasn't alone, but of course I was. I got up, showered, got dressed, and went into the kitchen. The chain was still there on the counter. That metallic smell was in the air, heavier than before. It almost made me gag when I got too close. I decided to put the chain back in its wooden box. I placed it in the box, then slid the box into a drawer in the living room. For the rest of the day, I tried to go about my usual routine. Some errands, a bit of work at my computer, a quick run for groceries. But I felt on edge, like I had an itch in the back of my skull. My hands trembled slightly, even without touching the chain, and I still heard that faint buzzing now and then. That night I had another nightmare. This time, I was standing in my living room and the lights were off. The chain was on the floor, glowing faintly in the dark. I reached down to pick it up, but my hand wouldn't move the way I wanted. Instead, it felt like something guided my hand to grab the pendant. Then everything went pitch black. I snapped awake, my heart hammering, sweating again. I turned on the light and checked my arms, more scratches, this time on both forearms. They burned when I touched them. I started to worry. I told my friend Marcus about what was happening. We met for coffee the next morning. I showed him the chain, which I had put back in the box but brought with me to explain everything. He suggested I just leave it alone. He thought maybe it was messing with my head, especially given my grandfather's passing and all the stress I was under. He said, "Dude, just put that thing away. Don't wear it, don't touch it, keep it locked up." I decided to follow his advice. I left it in the box and put it on the highest shelf in my closet once I got home. But things got worse. Even without touching it, I started hearing strange noises in the house at night. It sounded like soft footsteps on the hardwood floor, usually around midnight. I'd jump out of bed, rush to the hallway, and turn on the lights. No one was ever there, but the air felt heavier, like a humid day but without the heat. There were times I stood there, heart pounding, sure that I saw something move in the corner of my eye. But when I turned, there was nothing. I began to dread going to sleep. The nightmares didn't stop, and every time I woke up, I found new superficial scratches. Some were on my shoulders, some on my back. I tried sleeping with a shirt on, but it made no difference. The marks showed up anyway. My nails were still short, and the angles of the scratches didn't make sense for self-inflicted wounds. I felt my sanity slipping. One night, I decided to investigate every inch of the closet. I took out the box with the chain, turned on every light in the room, and set the box on the floor. I just stared at it, trying to gather the courage to open it. My heart pounded in my chest, my breathing got shallow, and I felt sweat forming on my forehead. I flipped the lid open. The chain sat there, looking dull as ever, but it practically radiated that metallic smell. The buzzing sound grew louder in my ears. My fingertips felt cold. I reached in and grabbed the chain. My hands shook more intensely this time. I held it up close to my face, turning the pendant over, trying to find anything, an engraving, a mark, a symbol. Nothing. The surface was smooth, completely blank, but it felt like it had a pulse, like it was alive in some twisted way. My hands felt weaker the longer I held it, so I shoved it back in the box and slammed the lid. I tried to sleep after that, but I kept hearing faint clicking noises in the closet, like metal tapping against wood. Every little sound in the house startled me. When I did drift off, I dreamed of being dragged across the hallway, unable to speak or resist. In the dream, I felt a heavy weight on my chest, pressing down, suffocating me. I woke up gasping, sweat dripping down my neck, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. My arms were covered in red streaks, stinging so bad that I had to get up and rinse them under cold water. After that, I couldn't stand to keep the chain in the house anymore. I decided I would leave it somewhere else, maybe in a storage unit or at a friend's place. But every time I looked at the box, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. My gut told me that once I took the box out of the closet, something would follow me. I don't have any logical reason for that feeling, but it was strong. It made the hair on my arm stand up. I tried to distract myself with TV, music, even some light reading, but the same pattern repeated each night. Strange footsteps, soft scraping noises, nightmares, new scratches. I stopped inviting people over because I felt embarrassed. My house looked normal during the day, but at night it turned into a place I hardly recognized. Every shadow seemed longer and darker. Every door creaked louder. I started triple-checking the locks. I even bought new cameras and installed them around the exterior, but none of that helped. One night, I texted Marcus around 2 in the morning, telling him I couldn't handle it anymore. He told me to get rid of the chain permanently, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it in the trash or bury it somewhere. It belonged to my grandfather, and despite everything, I felt weirdly guilty about discarding it. I decided maybe I could store it at Marcus's place. He was a close friend, but he lived about an hour away. That evening, I packed the chain in the wooden box and wrapped the box in an old towel. I put it in a paper bag and loaded it into my car. My plan was to drive to Marcus's house first thing the next morning, but that night I barely slept. I kept the bedroom door locked, but around midnight I heard knocking on the walls. It started in the living room, then moved to the hallway, then right outside my bedroom. It wasn't loud, but it was steady. I clenched my fists, sweat gathering on my palms. My heart beat so hard that I felt lightheaded. I stayed awake until dawn, sitting in bed with a baseball bat in my hands, facing the door. The knocking stopped around 3 in the morning. After sunrise, I felt some relief. I got dressed, grabbed my keys, and headed for the car. When I opened the trunk, the paper bag was torn, the towel was half on the floor. The wooden box was still there, but the lid was ajar. I felt a jolt in my stomach. My hands shook as I checked inside. The chain was tangled as if someone had yanked on it. I didn't see any sign of a break-in, and I couldn't figure out how the bag got ripped or how the box opened on its own. I wrapped it all up again, slammed the trunk shut, and drove straight to Marcus's place. The whole way there, I had the same ear-buzzing feeling, like pressure building. My mouth felt dry, and I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something in the back seat. When I finally got to Marcus's house, he opened the door and saw the state I was in, pale, shaky, eyes bloodshot. I dropped the box on his coffee table and said, "I can't keep this in my house anymore." He nodded, though he looked uneasy. We checked the chain again, but it looked the same as always, blank and dull. The smell was intense, though, and Marcus even recoiled when he got too close. We sealed the box with packing tape and stuffed it in an old chest he had in his garage. I stayed at his place that night. It was the first full night of sleep I had in weeks. No footsteps, no knocking, no nightmares, no scratches. The next morning, I felt like a new person, though I was still jittery. I told Marcus I'd come back in a few days to see how things were going. So far, I haven't had any more nightmares or unexplained scratches, but I can't shake the feeling that whatever was in that chain isn't done with me. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night at home, sure that I hear that faint metal scraping, but it fades when I fully awaken. Maybe it's just my imagination, maybe not. All I know is that I can't handle having that thing near me again. If it stays taped up in that chest and I don't have to deal with the nightmares anymore, maybe I'll finally get some peace. But every now and then, in the quiet moments, my hands still tremble and my ears still buzz, and I can't help thinking about that warm spot in my pocket the first time I brought the chain home. I wonder what it really was, and I wonder if one day I'll hear that same knocking outside my bedroom door. The abandoned warehouse. There's a certain kind of curiosity that only grows stronger the more you try to ignore it. Some places just call to you, even when every instinct says to stay away. For me, that place was an old military warehouse on the outskirts of town, a blocky gray building with broken windows, rusted doors, and a chain-link fence that barely stood upright. I'd driven past it 100 times, always wondering what was inside, always telling myself it was just another piece of forgotten history. But the urge to explore it never really went away. It was late summer when I finally gave in. The days were long, the air heavy with humidity, and the sky seemed to hang low over the town. I told my friend Mark about the warehouse, and he was immediately on board. We'd both grown up watching urban exploration videos, fascinated by the idea of finding something hidden, something left behind. We picked a Saturday afternoon, figuring it would be easier to slip in unnoticed when the roads were quiet. We parked my car behind a stand of bushes, out of sight from the main road. The fence was easy to climb. Someone had already bent it down in one corner, and we slipped through without much trouble. The lot was overgrown with weeds and the pavement was cracked, tufts of grass poking through every gap. The main gate hung on one hinge, creaking in the breeze. I felt a chill, even though the air was warm. The warehouse itself was massive, a relic from another era. The metal door at the front was dented and streaked with rust, as if someone had tried to break it open years ago. Mark pressed on it, and it gave way with a screech that echoed through the empty lot. We stepped inside, and the first thing I noticed was the smell, a stale, dusty odor that made my nose twitch. I tried not to breathe too deeply. The floor was concrete, cracked and uneven, with empty crates and broken chairs scattered around. Some overhead lights were still there, but they were covered in grime and didn't work. The space felt endless, our footsteps echoing off the walls. That echo made me feel like we weren't supposed to be there, like we were trespassing on someone else's territory. Mark nudged my shoulder and pointed to the right. There was a narrow hallway leading away from the main area, lit only by a single flickering emergency light at the far end. The bulb looked like it was on its last leg, barely holding on. The hallway walls had peeling paint, and parts of the ceiling looked like they might collapse at any moment. Water stains and exposed wiring ran overhead. I felt uneasy, like I was walking into a place that had been forgotten for a reason. We passed a few doors, most of them locked or blocked by old furniture. One had a sign that said "Command Office," but the handle wouldn't budge. We kept going, the darkness growing thicker with every step. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom. It lit up a broken filing cabinet on the floor, scattered papers, and a desk flipped on its side. Mark stayed close behind me, his breathing shallow, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds. Eventually, we reached a small room with a single table in the center. The ceiling lamp was broken, so it was dim, only lit by our flashlights. On the table was an old notebook, the cover torn and water damaged. I picked it up, the pages yellow and stained, the handwriting so messy I could barely read it. There were random dates, incomplete sentences, and mentions of night patrols. Some lines described strange noises at night. Another part mentioned voices calling to the soldiers on guard duty. I felt a chill run through my arms when I saw the words "voices calling." I tried to imagine the scenario, a soldier alone at night, hearing something that sounded like a person speaking, only there was nobody there. My heartbeat sped up. I handed the notebook to Mark so he could see for himself. He frowned at the messy writing, squinting at a passage that described footsteps echoing in the corridors. Then he shut the notebook and handed it back, not saying a word. That's when we heard it, a distant thump from down the hall. It sounded like a door closing, but it came in a slow, repeating pattern. I snapped my head up. Mark looked at me and I saw the same question on his face. Who else could be in here? The rhythmic thumping continued for a few seconds, then stopped. My stomach twisted in knots. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind pushing a door, but I didn't feel any breeze. The air was still and stuffy. I put the notebook in my backpack and gestured for Mark to follow me. We walked toward the direction of the sound, our footsteps slow and careful. My palms were sweaty, and I kept my phone flashlight aimed ahead of us. The corridor opened into another large section of the warehouse, this one filled with metal cabinets, lockers, and shelves pushed against the walls. Some lockers were dented or rusted. A few had doors hanging off the hinges. The place smelled like old metal and damp concrete. Our flashlights caught drifting particles of dust floating in the air. We checked a few of the lockers out of curiosity. Most were empty. One had a stack of moldy papers. Another had a single boot that looked torn and covered in dust. I heard a faint dripping sound somewhere, like water leaking through the roof. My shoulders tensed up with every step, worried that we might see a rat or something worse, but there was nothing. No sign of life at all, just musty air and decaying furniture. Suddenly, one of the locker doors swung open. It made a harsh screech that echoed in the empty space. I jumped back, almost dropping my phone. Mark let out a sharp gasp. The door just stood there, wide open. There was no draft, no wind, no movement in the air, but the locker door had swung open on its own. My heart pounded in my ears. I clenched my flashlight so hard my hands started to cramp. I quickly stepped forward and slammed the locker shut. The door banged closed with a loud clang, and I felt the vibration in my arm. I didn't want to stand there any longer. Mark and I exchanged one terrified glance, and we both knew we needed to leave. We walked fast, retracing our steps toward the main entrance. My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. I kept thinking about the notebook, those lines about voices. We got out of the warehouse and stumbled into the open air. I breathed in as deeply as I could, even though the air still felt humid and heavy. We ran back to my car without saying anything. Once we were inside, Mark exhaled loudly and muttered something about never going back. I nodded, turned the key, and drove out of there. My hands shook on the steering wheel until we reached the main road. That night I couldn't sleep well. My body felt restless, and my thoughts kept drifting back to the sound of that locker door and the strange pounding noise. I thought I heard a faint murmur in my bedroom, but I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. Around 3 in the morning, I finally dozed off. My dreams were chaotic. I saw long corridors that looked like the warehouse hallways, heard voices echoing my name. I jolted awake with sweat running down my forehead, my t-shirt clinging to my skin, my chest rising and falling with each shallow breath. The next morning, I felt groggy, my mind clouded. I sent Mark a text to see how he was doing. He wrote back that he was fine, but hadn't slept much either. I didn't mention my nightmares. I just said I was glad we got out before anything worse happened. I spent most of the day trying to push the whole experience out of my mind, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that rusted locker door swinging open. My neck tensed, and my stomach turned. I tried to watch some TV to distract myself, but I kept replaying the events in my head. The second night after our visit was worse. I had another dream where I wandered the same corridors alone. My flashlight flickered, and I heard the rhythmic banging sound echoing in the distance. Then I heard whispered voices calling my name. My heart pounded in the dream, and I felt my hands shaking. I saw a faint figure in the shadows, but I couldn't tell who or what it was. When I woke up, I was drenched in sweat again. I threw my covers aside and sat on the edge of my bed, breathing hard and trying to calm down. The following days, I started to feel jumpy and distracted at work. I made mistakes I never used to make. My boss asked if something was wrong. I just said I hadn't been sleeping well. I didn't want to explain the whole warehouse story. I figured nobody would believe me anyway. Mark and I talked a few times, and he said he was also getting weird vibes, like he'd turn off a light in his house and hear a faint click in another room. He told me he felt like the building was stuck in his head. We agreed not to go back there, but we couldn't shake the feeling that the place had somehow clung to us. Every night I lay in bed dreading the moment when I'd close my eyes. I tried sleeping pills, but they only made my mind hazy. I still dreamt of those corridors, that empty locker, the banging noise. Sometimes in my dreams, I caught glimpses of the old notebook's pages, words scrawled in the same messy handwriting, telling me to listen. In those moments, my heartbeat would spike, and I'd wake up gasping for air. I'd reach for my phone, but I never wanted to look at the time. It always felt like it was the middle of the night. One evening, I decided to open that notebook again. I pulled it out of my backpack, which I dumped in my closet. It smelled musty, like the warehouse. I felt a wave of nausea just holding it. I turned the brittle pages carefully, shining a small lamp on them so I wouldn't strain my eyes. The text was mostly unreadable, but I saw references to guard duty, cold spots in the halls, and inexplicable knocks. The soldier who wrote it seemed unsettled. He mentioned being afraid to sleep, complaining that he heard voices outside his quarters. I felt my arms trembling as I recognized the same kind of fear I was experiencing now. I thought about throwing the notebook away or burning it, but some part of me hesitated. I feared destroying it might worsen the situation. I know that sounds irrational, but I couldn't help it. My nerves were frayed and I wasn't thinking clearly. I ended up shoving the notebook back into a drawer and slamming it shut. My stomach churned, and I could feel a cold sweat forming on my forehead. At night, I heard a sound in my living room around midnight. It sounded like a chair scraping across the floor. My heart raced and I got out of bed to check. I flicked on every light as I walked through my small apartment. Everything looked normal. No chairs had moved. Nothing was out of place. My hands were shaking when I grabbed a glass of water from the kitchen. I drank it in one gulp and realized my breathing was ragged. I forced myself to take slow, deep breaths until I felt somewhat calmer. The next few nights followed the same pattern: nightmares, strange noises, a constant feeling of unease. I jolt awake with the sensation that someone was standing over me or whispering in my ear. I'd check my bedroom door, the corners of the room, the hallway, and find nothing. I'd try to tell myself it was all in my head. I tried playing music or leaving a TV on for background noise, but that only made me more aware of every sound. After a week of this, I called Mark and asked if he was experiencing the same thing. He admitted he was still feeling on edge, but insisted that the worst of it seemed to be behind him. He told me to relax, that maybe my mind was more sensitive to the place than his. I got mad at him for dismissing how intense it felt. He apologized, but didn't know what else to say. I started to consider going back to the warehouse, just to see if there was something I could set right or figure out. The idea of returning made my stomach turn, but I was desperate. I thought maybe I could uncover more about the place, why it got abandoned, who wrote that notebook, and what was causing the weird experiences. But every time I pictured myself stepping into that dark corridor, I felt a sudden spike of panic. My mouth went dry, and my heartbeat raced. One night, I dreamt again about the locker opening by itself. In the dream, I stood there frozen while the door swung outward with a deafening squeal. I felt like I was suffocating. Then a voice whispered my name right behind my ear. I spun around and woke up, drenched in sweat, my throat dry, my pillow soaked. I grabbed my phone and realized I was shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I looked around my dark bedroom. The silence pressed on my ears. My heart thudded. I noticed my closet door was slightly open, even though I always shut it. I told myself it was nothing. I walked over, closed it, and locked it. I stood there in the dark for a moment, feeling my skin prickling. Then I climbed back in bed, not sure if I could sleep. I'm still stuck with these nightmares. Every time I close my eyes, that place returns to me. I see the dust-covered halls, the rusted lockers, the faint light from my phone scanning across the walls. I hear that banging noise echoing in my mind, like a distant reminder of something I can't escape. My body jolts awake again and again, my heart pounding so hard it hurts. I've considered seeing a therapist, but I'm afraid they'll think I'm making it up or overreacting. I can't shake the feeling that something latched onto me that day in the warehouse. I don't know what it is. I don't have any proof aside from the nightmares and the notes in that old notebook. There are no bruises on my skin, no actual injuries, no direct signs, yet the fear is real. It's a clench in my stomach, a wave of nausea, a rush of adrenaline whenever I remember the screech of metal doors opening by themselves. I keep telling myself it'll pass if I just wait, but it's been a while and the dreams haven't stopped. They come in waves, leaving me drained and sweaty. During the day, I fight the urge to look over my shoulder or check my closet. At night, I do everything possible to fall asleep, but nothing works for long. I lie there, my mind drifting back to that abandoned military warehouse, wondering if there's more hidden inside those walls. Every little sound in my apartment makes my heartbeat jump. Every small draft of air against my neck sets me on edge. Mark doesn't want to talk about it much anymore. He says he's moved on, and maybe he has. But for me, those few hours inside that building changed something. I can't explain it, and I can't forget it. And sometimes, when the night is quiet and the world feels empty, I wonder if the warehouse is still waiting for me to come back.